Hello everyone. This is our final project presentation video. And our task is to do source localization using gradient-based learning. To begin with, we start from introduction to background knowledge. Basically, when mentioning about the acquisition of brain signal, people often use non-invasive method based on the theorem of electromagnetism, that is, EEG or MEG. Particularly, we utilize MEG signal for this project, which has relatively small noise compared with EEG signal. MEG, magnetoencephalography, is a functional neuroimaging technique for mapping brain activity, by recording magnetic fields produced by electrical currents occurring naturally in the brain. Using very sensitive magnetometers, we use MEG signal to solve brain localization problem. But what is source localization? Source localization, also called the inverse problem, aims to determine the location of electric activity within the brain, from the induced magnetic fields outside the head. The primary difficulty is that this problem does not have a unique solution and lack of ground truth. Previous works to the problem usually set one constraint at a time and get math-close form answer, which may not be reasonable enough. Our objective is to implement gradient-based learning technique for the ill-posed source localization problem. With the flexibility of gradient-based learning, we can combine multiple constraints with our architecture to get superior result to previous works. Our data including MRI and MEG is obtained from previous project of our lab. Specifically, we make use of two types of tasks: auditory evoked field task and somatosensory evoked field task. The MEG device is NeuroMag's 306-channel vector view system. Before training, we have to pre-process the raw MEG data, as shown in the figure, including band pass, removal of eye blink, artifacts, epoching. An common technique to solve the source localization problem is beamforming, where a forward model of the magnetic field produced by a given current dipole is used as a prior, along with second-order statistics of the data in the form of a covariance matrix, to calculate a linear weighting of the sensor array, the beamformer, via the Backus-Gilbert inverse. This is also known as a linearly constrained minimum variance beamformer. When the beamformer is applied to the data, it produces an estimate of the power in a virtual channel at the source location. Maximum contrast beamformer is a scalar beamformer method for finding the dipole orientation with maximum active to control state power ratio, i.e. the maximum contrast. Then compute the spatial filter which generates the maximum contrast for each voxel in brain. Specifically, we use some result from MCB as the initial value of our model. By assuming the dipole orientation resulted from MCB is relatively correct. This is our model architecture. The raw MEG signal, presented as M, will pass through the spatial filter and bring about initial signal strength for all sources. Afterwards, it will combine with a learnable scaling layer to generate more robust source result. The source result will then feed into a fixed forward model to reproduce MEG signal. Our task is to minimize the error resulting from MEG reconstruction loss, L1 loss and Laplacian loss of source domain. The reconstruction loss is intuitive, since the more accurate the source is, the reproducing MEG signal should be more similar. L1 loss is to limit the strength of source signal through time, so the task in our project will result in signals in a flash. Laplacian loss is to set appropriate smoothness in source domain. There are two types of networks in our work. One is BaseNet, which train the scaling layer only, which assumes the MCB result is good enough. The other is FCNet, which train both spatial filter and scaling layers simultaneously, therefore has much more powerful potential. These figures are the result of our architecture and traditional method. Left is result for auditory evoked field task. All the methods locate brain source at auditory cortex, while MN, the minimum norm estimate, produce a discrete distribution at source domain. By the property of the auditory evoked field task, our method is apparently superior to traditional method. Same result for somatosensory evoked field task is shown in right figure. Besides raw data, we also compare result for simulation data. From these figure, we can know that even if MCB can't get good spatial filter, our FCNet still can learn to locate the source, as compared with the other traditional methods. Also, the statistics also suggest our observation above. GOV is the goodness of fit for reconstructed mag data. WD is the weighted distance to dipoles for simulation data on source domain. Results from our model are the best among all. Our net performs well on the GOV of real data, compared with MN, which focus on exactly the MEG reconstruction error, and therefore performs well on GOV for simulated data, but bad on weighted distance in source domain. The result on source domain is more important, so our methods do outperform MN in general. Neural network and gradient learning have potential on finding possible source localization solution, as long as we set the constraints appropriately. For more powerful network, the reconstruction result will be much better, but it needs more constraints on source domain.